Keanu Reeves stepped out of the black SUV onto the glistening pavement outside the luxurious La Violette restaurant. The establishment, known for its Michelin-starred delicacies and exclusivity, was hosting an event tonight, and Keanu, ever the reluctant celebrity, had been persuaded to make an appearance. He smoothed his dark blazer and adjusted the sleeves of his signature black shirt before walking toward the grand entrance. As he made his way across the sidewalk, something unusual caught his attention. A young woman, no older than 25, standing under the dim glow of a street lamp. She was dressed in a simple yet elegant outfit, her long auburn hair cascading over her shoulders. She clutched a leather-bound notebook to her chest, her large, expressive eyes filled with hesitation and longing. Keanu wasn't one to ignore people. He'd always been known for his kindness and approachability, so instead of passing her by, he paused and offered a gentle smile. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice as soft as the evening breeze. The woman hesitated before nodding. "Yes. I think so. She bit her lip, clearly wrestling with her words. "I need to talk to you, Mr. Reeves. It's important." Something about her sincerity, her almost desperate plea, made Keanu stay. He gestured toward a nearby bench. "Let's sit and talk." As they sat on the bench, the distant sound of violin music from the restaurant mingled with the faint hum of city life. The woman took a deep breath, her fingers gripping the notebook tightly. "My name is Emily Carter," she began. "You don't know me, but you knew my mother." Her name was Olivia Carter. Keanu frowned slightly, the name stirring something deep within his memory. He hadn't heard that name in decades. "Olivia Carter," he murmured. "I knew an Olivia when I was younger. We met when I was just starting my career. She was a journalist," Emily finished for him, "an investigative reporter." Keanu nodded slowly, his mind traveling back in time. Olivia had been brilliant, fearless, and full of life. They had shared a deep connection, but life had pulled them in different directions. He hadn't heard from her in years. Emily's eyes welled up with tears. "She passed away 2 months ago." Keanu felt a pang in his chest. "I'm so sorry to hear that." Emily looked away, struggling to compose herself. "Before she died, she told me something shocking, something I need you to help me with." She opened the notebook, flipping through its pages. She left behind evidence of a conspiracy, something she never had the chance to expose, and she believed that you, of all people, were the only one who could help me uncover the truth. Keanu's mind raced. What could Olivia have possibly uncovered that was so important? And why would she think he could help? "I don't understand," he admitted. "Why me?" Emily hesitated before speaking. "Because she trusted you, and because the people she was investigating are dangerous. She thought you might have the connections and the resources to help me get the truth out." She handed Keanu the notebook. He flipped through the pages, his eyes scanning hastily written notes, newspaper clippings, and old photographs. Some of the names mentioned were vaguely familiar: powerful executives, politicians, and media moguls. "There's a lot in here," Keanu said. "Did she ever tell you exactly what she was working on?" Emily nodded. "She said it had to do with a hidden operation, something big. She believed that some of the most powerful people in the country were covering up crimes. She tried to get the story out, but every time she got close, something happened to silence her sources." Keanu exhaled sharply. "And you think someone might have been responsible for her death?" Emily met his gaze, her expression resolute. "I know they were." Keanu felt a chill run down his spine. He wasn't a stranger to the darker side of fame. He had seen how power could corrupt. If Olivia had uncovered something truly dangerous, Emily could be in real danger just by possessing this information. "Have you gone to the police?" Monty asked. Emily shook her head. "I can't trust them. Some of the names in that book, they have connections everywhere." Keanu nodded, understanding her fear. "All right," he said. "I'll help you, but we have to be careful." Emily let out a shaky breath as if a weight had been lifted. "Thank you, Mr. Reeves. I don't know what I would have done if you had just walked away." Keanu offered her a reassuring smile. "Call me Keanu." For the first time since they started talking, Emily smiled. But their brief moment of relief was shattered when a black car, its windows tinted, pulled up across the street. A man in a dark suit stepped out, his gaze locked onto them. Keanu noticed him immediately, his instincts kicking in. He placed a firm hand on Emily's arm. "We need to move, now." Emily's eyes widened with fear, but she nodded. Clutching the notebook tightly, she followed Keanu as they quickly slipped into the shadows, unaware that this was only the beginning of a perilous journey. Keanu stood frozen, his sharp breath visible in the cold night air. The young woman before him, Elena, had just uttered words that sent a chill down his spine. "You knew my mother," she had said. He searched her eyes, looking for any resemblance, any trace of someone from his past. Hollywood had blessed him with encounters from all walks of life, but something about her struck him differently. "Your mother?" he echoed, his voice barely above a whisper. Elena nodded, shifting on her feet, suddenly looking uncertain. Her name was Amelia Hart. She used to work at a little bookstore downtown years ago, before she disappeared. Keanu's throat tightened. The name rang in his memory like a bell struck after years of silence. Amelia? He hadn't thought about her in decades. The past had a way of creeping back when you least expected it. Keanu wasn't just a star before he was famous. He was a dreamer, a wanderer searching for meaning. Long before the fame, before the flashing lights, he had spent countless afternoons in a tiny, tucked-away bookstore filled with dusty classics and the smell of old parchment. It had been a sanctuary in his struggling days, and Amelia Hart had been its guardian. She was older than him by a few years, wise beyond her age, with deep brown eyes that saw through people. She had been a friend, a guide, a whisper of kindness in his hardest days. But she had vanished. One day the bookstore had closed. Amelia was gone without a trace. No goodbyes, no explanations. Just an empty space where warmth had once been. And now her daughter stood before him. Keanu felt his heart pound, his pulse quickening. Amelia? What happened to her? Elena's face darkened. "That's why I'm here." Elena stepped closer, clutching her coat tightly around her as though shielding herself from the ghosts of the past. "She went missing 20 years ago. I was just a child. One night, she left home, saying she had to meet someone. She never came back." Keanu swallowed, absorbing the weight of her words. "My father spent years searching for her," she continued, her voice trembling. "The police dismissed it as a voluntary disappearance, but my father never believed that. He thought she was taken, or worse." The air between them grew heavy. "Then, a week ago, I found something," Elena said, pulling a folded piece of paper from her pocket. She handed it to Keanu with hesitant hands. He unfolded it, his breath hitching as he read the faded ink. It was a letter from Amelia, and at the bottom, his name was written. "She wanted to see you before she vanished," Elena whispered. Keanu's fingers tightened around the fragile piece of paper as his eyes scanned the faded ink. The handwriting was unmistakably Amelia's, elegant, deliberate, yet trembling, as though she had written it in a hurry. His name stood at the bottom, staring back at him like a ghost from a life he thought he had left behind. He swallowed hard and read the letter aloud. "Keanu, if you receive this, it means I've run out of time. I don't know who else to turn to, and I fear I won't make it to see you myself. But there is something you need to know, something dangerous, something I should have told you years ago. You once asked me why I left so suddenly, why the bookstore closed overnight. The truth is, I was being watched. They were after me. And now they may be after Elena too. If you care for me at all, find my daughter. Keep her safe. She doesn't know the full truth yet, but she will soon. And when she does, she'll need someone she can trust. I hope it's not too late." Amelia Keanu's voice faltered as he reached the end. A strange, chilling silence hung between them. Elena's expression was unreadable, her lips slightly parted as if waiting for him to say something, anything. "She wrote this before she disappeared?" Keanu asked, his voice hoarse. Elena nodded. "I found it hidden inside an old book in my father's library. He never mentioned it. I don't even know if he ever saw it." Keanu ran a hand through his hair, his thoughts spiraling. Amelia had been in danger. Someone had been after her. But why? And now, decades later, her daughter stood before him, unknowingly stepping into the same darkness that had swallowed her mother. "Did your father ever tell you what happened to her?" Keanu asked. Elena hesitated. "He tried, but he never really had answers. He always believed she was taken by someone, but he never knew why." Keanu's jaw tightened. He looked down at the letter again, his mind racing. They were after me. They may be after Elena too. He glanced up at the young woman standing before him. If Amelia's fears had been real, then Elena was in danger. And if she was in danger, that meant so was he. A slow dread crept up his spine. "Elena," he said carefully, "has anyone been following you?" Her face paled. She hesitated, as if just realizing something. I don't know, but strange things have been happening. A black car parked outside my apartment for days, my mail being opened before I get it. And last night, I thought I heard someone outside my window, but when I checked, there was no one there." Keanu felt a deep, gut-wrenching certainty settle inside him. This wasn't a coincidence. Someone was watching her, just like they had watched Amelia. And now, they were watching him. He took a deep breath. "We need to get out of here." Elena looked up, alarmed. "What? Why?" Keanu glanced around, suddenly feeling exposed. The night air was still, but the streetlights flickered strangely. A few cars drove by, but one, parked across the street, hadn't moved since they started talking. Someone was watching. "We're not safe here," he said firmly. "Come with me. We need to find out what happened to your mother before history repeats itself." Elena hesitated, fear flashing in her eyes. But she saw the conviction in Keanu's gaze, the same conviction her father once had when searching for Amelia. She nodded. Keanu took one last glance at the letter in his hand, then carefully folded it, tucking it into his jacket. Whatever had taken Amelia Hart was still out there, and they were about to find out why. Keanu gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles turning white as the city lights blurred past. Elena sat beside him, tense, her hands resting on the letter that had changed everything. The air between them was thick with unanswered questions, but there was no time to dwell on them now. They needed to get out of sight, fast. The black car from across the street had pulled onto the road just moments after they left the restaurant. Keanu had caught the faint glint of its headlights in the mirror, trailing at a steady distance. Someone was following them. "You recognize that car?" Keanu asked, glancing at Elena. She turned, peering through the back window. "No," she said quietly. "But I've seen one like it near my apartment. I thought I was being paranoid." Keanu's jaw clenched. "You weren't." He pressed the gas pedal, weaving through late-night traffic. The car behind them stayed close, never too near, never too far. "They're pros," he muttered. "Not in a hurry to catch us, just making sure we don't disappear." Elena shivered. What do we do? Keanu's mind raced. His years in Hollywood had given him more than just a career. He'd learned from action legends, stunt drivers, security experts. He knew how to shake a tail. "Hold on," he said. With a sharp turn, he veered off the main road, diving into a series of narrow, winding side streets. The neon glow of the city dimmed, swallowed by the shadows of old buildings and forgotten alleys. He took another hard left, then a right, zigzagging through unfamiliar roads. Elena gasped, gripping the dashboard. "Are you sure you know where you're going?" Keanu smirked, eyes locked on the rearview mirror. "Nope." The black car was still behind them. Damn, these guys were good. Keanu's mind raced for options. Then he saw it, a small tunnel leading under an old bridge, barely wide enough for a single car. He didn't hesitate. He cut the headlights and plunged into darkness. For a few seconds, the only sound was the hum of the engine, the rush of air past the windows. Then, silence. Elena held her breath. Did it work? Keanu waited. 1 second. 2. Then, tires screeched in the distance. The black car had sped past. Keanu let out a slow breath. Yeah, for now. Elena exhaled, her body sinking into the seat. That was insane. Keanu smiled, but his mind was already working on the next move. Losing them once didn't mean they wouldn't find them again, and whoever was after them, whoever had been after Amelia, wasn't going to stop. "Where are we going now?" Elena asked. Keanu hesitated. There was only one place left to go, one person who might have answers. "To an old friend," he said. "Someone who knew your mother." Elena turned to him, eyes wide. "Who?" Keanu took a deep breath, his grip tightening on the wheel. "John Sinclair." The city streets blurred past as Keanu sped toward the outskirts, where the bright lights of Los Angeles faded into the quieter, older neighborhoods. Elena sat silently, gripping the envelope as though it contained her very existence. "Who is John Sinclair?" she finally asked, breaking the heavy silence. Keanu exhaled, his fingers drumming against the wheel. "He was an old friend of your mother, and mine, once." "Once?" Elena caught the hesitation in his voice. Keanu nodded, his gaze fixed on the road. "We had a falling out, but he knows things about Amelia that I never did. If anyone can help us understand why someone is after you, it's him." Elena frowned. "And you think he'll talk?" Keanu's jaw tightened. "He will." They drove in silence for another 15 minutes until they reached a quiet, run-down part of town. The street lights flickered above cracked sidewalks, and most of the houses were dark, their windows covered with heavy curtains. At the end of the street stood a small, dimly lit bar, Murphy's. Keanu pulled into the lot, scanning the area. There was no sign of the black car that had tailed them earlier, but his instincts told him they weren't safe yet. "Stay close," he said as he opened his door. Elena followed him into the bar. The place smelled of old leather and whiskey, the air thick with the murmurs of late-night conversations. A jukebox played a blues tune in the corner, and a few men sat hunched over their drinks. Behind the counter, a tall, broad-shouldered man in his 60s polished a glass with a rag. His silver hair was pulled back into a loose ponytail, and a deep scar ran from his left cheek down to his jaw. His sharp blue eyes locked onto Keanu the moment he stepped inside. "Well, I'll be damned," John Sinclair said, setting the glass down. "Keanu Reeves, back from the dead." Keanu smirked. "I could say the same about you." John leaned forward on the counter, his gaze shifting to Elena. "And who's this?" Elena hesitated. Keanu placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "This is Amelia's daughter." John's expression changed in an instant. His face, once unreadable, softened with something between shock and sorrow. "Amelia's..." He exhaled sharply, rubbing his chin. Jesus Christ. Elena stepped forward. "You knew my mother?" John nodded slowly. "Better than most." His voice was thick with something unspoken. "She was... special." Keanu took a seat at the bar. We don't have much time, John. Someone's been following us. Someone who doesn't want Elena to learn the truth about her mother. John sighed, reaching for a bottle of whiskey. He poured himself a glass, then looked at them both. You two don't know what you've stumbled into, do you? Keanu exchanged a glance with Elena. We know Amelia was hiding something. John took a long sip of his drink, then set it down with a heavy thud. She wasn't just hiding something, Keanu. He turned to Elena, his blue eyes filled with something that almost looked like regret. She was hiding you? Elena's breath caught in her throat. Hiding me? John Sinclair nodded slowly, his fingers tracing the rim of his glass. The air in the dimly lit bar grew heavier, thick with unspoken truths. Keanu leaned in, his sharp gaze locked onto John. You better start talking. John sighed, rubbing a hand over his face as if wiping away ghosts of the past. Amelia was never who you thought she was, kid. He looked directly at Elena. She wasn't just some woman trying to make a life for herself. She was running from people who don't forgive, who don't forget. Elena's fingers curled into fists. Running from who? John exhaled sharply. The Dominion? Keanu stiffened. They're still active? Oh, they never went away, John said bitterly. They just got smarter. Elena's mind raced. Who are they? John glanced around the bar, ensuring no one was listening. Then, lowering his voice, he said, They're an underground organization. Not just criminals, but power players, politicians, CEOs, ex-military, all working together in the shadows, controlling things from behind the scenes. If Amelia was hiding you, it means they wanted you for something. Elena shook her head. That doesn't make any sense. My mother was just normal. She worked at a law firm. She wasn't... She was part of them, John interrupted. A long time ago. Elena's stomach twisted. No, that's not possible. Keanu remained silent, but his jaw was clenched. John continued. She was one of their top strategists, helped them plan operations, silent takeovers of companies, political blackmail, even disappearances. Elena's pulse pounded in her ears. You're lying. I wish I was. John's voice softened. But then she did something no one expected. She fell in love. With your father. Elena blinked. My father? John nodded. He was an outsider, a journalist, one of the few who had gotten too close to the truth about the Dominion. When Amelia met him, something changed. She realized she didn't want to be a part of their world anymore. But leaving was never an option. Keanu sighed. No one just leaves the Dominion. John took another drink. She ran with your father. And then, when you were born, she disappeared completely. Changed her name. Built a new life. He looked at Elena. She did everything to keep you safe. Elena's mind reeled. Her mother had always been quiet, reserved, but inoperative for some secret society? It couldn't be true. My father, she whispered. What happened to him? John hesitated, then said, He was killed. The Dominion made sure of that. A cold shudder ran through Elena. Keanu's fists tightened. So why are they after her now, after all these years? John shook his head. That's the part I don't know. But if they're resurfacing, it means they want something Amelia left behind. Elena's grip on the envelope tightened. Maybe this. John's eyes darkened. What's in there? Elena carefully pulled out the contents, a set of old letters, a key, and a photograph, one that made John go completely pale. Oh, hell, he muttered, standing up so suddenly that his chair scraped against the wooden floor. What? Keanu asked. John pointed at the photograph. It was an image of a man standing in front of a grand estate, his face obscured by shadows. That house? John's voice was low and urgent. "That's the Dominion's headquarters." Elena's breath hitched. "What does that mean?" John's expression was grim. "It means Amelia wasn't just hiding you." He turned to Keanu. "She was planning something." Keanu's eyes narrowed. "Something big." John nodded. "And if the Dominion is after you now?" He turned back to Elena. "They think you are the key to finishing what she started." Elena stared at the photograph in her trembling hands. The looming estate in the background, the shadowed figure standing in front of it. It was unsettling, almost as if the image itself carried a hidden menace. She traced the edges of the worn photograph with her thumb, her mother's secrets unraveling in ways she never imagined. The letters, the key, the Dominion, nothing in her life had been real. Keanu placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "Elena, whatever your mother was planning, we need to figure it out before they do." John nodded. "That key isn't just any key." He motioned toward it. "That's a lockbox key, safe deposit type, not just for some old cabinet in a house. This is for something important, something hidden." Elena turned the key over in her fingers. It was small, unassuming, but as she examined it closer, she noticed something engraved along the side. B79. John exhaled sharply. "Bank safe." Keanu leaned forward. "Which bank?" John shook his head. "It's not just any bank. If Amelia was being smart, she wouldn't have kept it in a regular institution. The Dominion has their hands in too many places. If she stored something, it had to be somewhere off the grid." Elena looked between them. "Then how do we find it?" John hesitated before responding. "There's someone who might know." Keanu frowned. "You're talking about him, aren't you?" John nodded solemnly. "Harris?" Elena furrowed her brow. "Who's Harris?" John let out a dry chuckle. "A man who has sold more secrets than anyone I know. Used to be a Dominion asset before he turned against them. He knows their financial operations, where they hide things." Keanu crossed his arms. "And where do we find him?" John sighed. "That's the problem. He moves constantly. Last I heard, he was in New Orleans. But getting to him won't be easy." Elena looked between them. "Then we go." Keanu gave her a long look. "Elena, this isn't just a game. These people will kill to protect their secrets." She straightened her shoulders. "And I'm done running. My mother left me this for a reason. If I don't figure out what she was trying to do, then everything she did to protect me was for nothing." John studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Then we move fast. If Harris is in New Orleans, we need to be there before the Dominion realizes we're on his trail." Keanu exhaled. "Fine. But if we do this, we do it my way. I know how these people operate." Elena gave him a determined look. "Then lead the way." John smirked. "I'll get us a plane. Pack light." As they stood up, Elena clutched the key in her hand. She had spent years believing her mother was just a quiet, ordinary woman. But now she knew the truth. Amelia had been running not just from the Dominion, but toward something, and Elena was going to finish what she started. The plane touched down in New Orleans under the cover of night. The air was thick with humidity, the scent of rain and jasmine lingering in the breeze. Neon signs flickered over the French Quarter, where jazz music spilled onto the streets. Elena pulled her hoodie tighter around her head as they stepped out of the small, private airport terminal. The less attention they attracted, the better. Keanu, wearing a dark jacket and cap, scanned the area for any signs of trouble, while John checked his phone for updates. "Harris isn't the kind of guy you just call up for a chat," John muttered as they walked toward a black SUV waiting for them. "He stays off the grid for a reason." Keanu opened the car door for Elena before sliding into the passenger seat. "Then we find someone who can get us to him." John nodded as he started the engine. "I have a contact, goes by Rue. She runs a club in the quarter. If Harris is in town, she'll know." Elena shifted in the back seat. "And she's trustworthy?" John smirked. "As trustworthy as a woman who deals in secrets can be." The drive through the city felt surreal to Elena. The ornate balconies, the old-world charm mixed with modern decadence. It was like stepping into another time. But she knew their mission had nothing to do with sightseeing. The club, the Gilded Lily, was tucked away in a quieter part of town, its entrance marked only by a golden fleur-de-lis above a red door. The deep bass of music thrummed through the walls as they stepped inside. A woman with deep brown skin, piercing green eyes, and a sharp red dress watched them from the bar. She sipped a glass of bourbon, her expression unreadable as John approached. "Well, well," Rue drawled. "If it isn't John Harper, you bring me something interesting or just trouble?" John leaned on the bar. "Bit of both." He slid a folded bill across the counter. "We need Harris." Rue chuckled, pocketing the money without looking at it. "Harris isn't a man you just find. He finds you, if he wants to." Elena stepped forward. "We have something he'll want to see." She held up the key. Rue's eyes flicked to it, her expression changing ever so slightly. "Now that is interesting." She leaned in. "He's in the bayou, deep in. You want to find him? You'll need a boat." Keanu exhaled. "Of course we will." Navigating the Louisiana bayou at night was like slipping into another world. The water was inky black, the trees twisted and gnarled, their branches stretching like skeletal fingers over the murky water. The hum of insects was constant, broken only by the occasional splash of something moving beneath the surface. Elena gripped the side of the boat as John steered them forward. "I really hope whatever's in this water isn't hungry." Keanu sat beside her, his gaze focused on the dense fog rolling over the bayou. "Just don't fall in," John chuckled. "Harris keeps himself hidden for a reason. He doesn't trust anyone." They followed Rue's directions until they spotted a dimly lit shack on stilts, almost blending into the darkness. As they pulled up, a figure stepped onto the rickety porch, a shotgun slung casually over his shoulder. "Harris!" John called out. The man's face was lined with years of hard living. His gray hair was tied back in a loose ponytail, and his sharp blue eyes flickered with suspicion. "Turn around," Harris said, his voice low. "Ain't interested in company." Elena held up the key. "This belonged to my mother." Amelia Lawson Harris froze. His grip on the shotgun tightened, then loosened. He stepped closer, studying her face in the dim light. "Amelia's daughter," he murmured. "Well, I'll be damned." He motioned for them to come inside. The shack was cluttered with old maps, stacks of papers, and an old radio crackling with static. He poured himself a drink, then gestured for them to speak. John leaned forward. "We need to know what this key opens." Harris ran a hand down his face. "You have no idea what you've stepped into." Elena's jaw tightened. "Then tell us." Harris sighed. "That key doesn't just open a safe. It unlocks something buried, something your mother was trying to keep out of the Dominion's hands." Keanu exchanged a glance with John. "Where?" Harris took a slow sip of whiskey. "New York, but if you go there, you'd better be ready for war." Back in the city, the Dominion was already moving. A tall man in a tailored suit stood in front of a large monitor, watching security footage from the New Orleans airport. He tapped a finger against his chin as he observed Elena and Keanu boarding their flight. A woman in a sleek black dress entered the room. They found Harris. The man exhaled through his nose. "Then we move now. They won't make it to New York." The Dominion's reach extended into every major city, every government system, and every intelligence network. They had remained in the shadows for decades, but now their secret was at risk. The key in Elena's possession was more than just a key. It was proof of their darkest project, and they would kill to keep it buried. The plane soared through the dark sky, its engines humming steadily, but Elena couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. She sat beside Keanu, gripping the armrest as the city lights of New Orleans disappeared beneath them. John sat across the aisle, scrolling through his phone. Harris wasn't lying. I did some digging. Your mother wasn't just hiding from the Dominion, she was working against them. Elena's throat tightened. What do you mean? Keanu leaned in. Your mother was one of their lead scientists, right? John nodded. She worked on a classified project, something big. Then she vanished. Now we know why. She stole whatever they were working on. Elena's mind raced. And she left me the key. Keanu exhaled. Which means we're not the only ones heading to New York. As if on cue, the plane's intercom crackled. Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing some unexpected turbulence. John frowned. That's not turbulence? Keanu stood up, glancing down the aisle. Two men in dark suits had just entered from the back of the plane, moving toward them. Dominion? John muttered. Elena's pulse quickened. They wouldn't try anything here, would they? The men moved faster. Keanu didn't wait to find out. He grabbed Elena's hand and pulled her up just as one of the men reached for a concealed weapon. John reacted instantly, flipping the tray table up into the man's face before lunging at him. Chaos erupted in the cabin. Passengers screamed as the plane jolted. The second Dominion agent grabbed Keanu, slamming him against a seat. Keanu gritted his teeth, blocking a punch before landing a sharp elbow to the man's ribs. Elena turned in time to see the first agent pulling a gun. No. She grabbed a metal serving tray from the aisle and swung it with all her strength, knocking the weapon from his hand. John took the opportunity to drive a knee into the man's stomach, sending him crashing into a row of seats. Keanu twisted his attacker's arm, forcing him down. "Who sent you?" the agent sneered. "You'll never make it to New York." The plane jolted again. The pilot's voice came over the intercom. "We are making an emergency landing in Washington, D.C. due to onboard disturbances." John groaned. "Great. That means the Dominion will have reinforcements waiting for us." Elena's heart pounded. "Then we can't land in Washington." Keanu's jaw tightened. "Then we take the escape route." John blinked. "You're not seriously suggesting—" Keanu was already moving toward the emergency exit. The wind howled as the plane descended toward Washington, D.C. Below them, city lights flickered like tiny stars. Keanu stood by the emergency exit, securing the parachutes that the crew kept for emergencies. John shook his head. "I can't believe I'm doing this." Elena swallowed hard. "I've never skydived before." Keanu smirked. "First time for everything." The Dominion agents were stirring, trying to rise, but the turbulence kept them off balance. John yanked the exit handle. The door burst open, and wind roared into the cabin. "Jump!" Keanu shouted. Elena hesitated for only a second before Keanu grabbed her hand and leaped. The air hit her like a wall, her stomach lurching as they plummeted. Keanu kept his grip on her, signaling when to pull the parachute cord. The sudden force yanked her upward, the parachute blossoming above them. John landed not far away, cursing under his breath. "That was insane!" Elena exhaled shakily. "But we're alive." Keanu pointed to a road below. "And that's our ride." A black car was parked in the shadows, its driver stepping out. It was a woman, tall, confident, with sharp eyes that took them all in. John grinned. "Did I mention I have a friend in D.C.? Elena shook her head. "You really need to lead with these things." The woman, Nadia, motioned for them to get in. "We need to move now. Dominion forces are already sweeping the airport." As they sped away from the landing site, Elena looked at Keanu. "We need to get to New York fast." Keanu nodded. Then we don't stop until we find what your mother left behind. The drive to New York was long, tense, and filled with planning. They switched vehicles twice, avoiding Dominion surveillance. By the time they reached the city, the sun was rising over Manhattan, casting golden light over glass towers. John traced a map with his finger. The coordinates Harris gave us lead to an old underground bank vault. If your mother hid something there, it's been locked away for years. Nadia parked in a quiet alley. I'll keep watch. Elena, Keanu, and John slipped into the abandoned building. Dust covered the marble floors, and broken chandeliers hung like skeletons from the ceiling. The vault door stood massive and unyielding at the back of the room. Elena stepped forward, her hands shaking as she fit the key into the lock. Click. The heavy door groaned as it swung open, revealing a dimly lit chamber. Inside was a single metal case, covered in dust. Elena hesitated before opening it. Inside lay a stack of documents, an old hard drive, and a leather-bound journal. John grabbed one of the papers. His eyes widened. This is encrypted Dominion data, blueprints, experiments, names, everything. Elena picked up the journal. Her mother's handwriting covered the first page. If you are reading this, it means I have failed to stop them, but you still can. Her fingers tightened around the book. Keanu turned sharply. We're not alone. From the shadows, a figure stepped forward, tall, dressed in black, his face hidden beneath a mask. Elena's breath caught. They weren't just being followed. They had been led here. The vault was silent, but the air was thick with tension. Keanu instinctively stepped in front of Elena, his stance tense. John moved beside him, his hand hovering near his concealed weapon. The masked figure tilted his head slightly, his voice calm but firm. You should not have come here. Elena tightened her grip on her mother's journal. Who are you? The man exhaled. Someone who tried to stop your mother before she made a terrible mistake, John scoffed. Yeah? And what mistake was that? The figure took a step closer. Trying to take down the Dominion alone? Elena's breath caught. You knew her. The man reached up and removed his mask. Beneath it was a middle-aged man with piercing gray eyes and a scar running down his cheek. My name is Adrian Cross, he said, and I was your mother's partner. Silence filled the chamber. Elena's world spun. That's not possible. Keanu narrowed his eyes. You were Dominion? Cross nodded. A long time ago, but when I saw what they were doing, I defected. Your mother and I tried to bring them down from the inside. John folded his arms. Didn't work out, did it? Cross shook his head. Number, she paid the price. And now? They know you have the key. Elena swallowed hard. Then we don't have much time. Cross glanced at the documents in the case. You have no idea what you've uncovered. The Dominion isn't just an underground organization. Keanu stiffened. Then what are they? Cross's expression darkened. They own the world. A low rumble echoed through the vault. The walls trembled. John cursed. They're here. Cross grabbed Elena's arm. We have to move, now. Keanu slammed the vault door shut behind them as they ran back up the marble stairs. Nadia's voice came over John's earpiece. You've got company, black SUVs pulling in from both sides. Elena's heart pounded. How do we get out? Cross didn't hesitate. Follow me. He led them down a side corridor where an old freight elevator stood rusting. He yanked the gate open and motioned for them to get inside. John frowned. An elevator? That's your plan? Cross pressed a button. The metal box jolted and began descending. Keanu kept his eyes on the doors. They won't just let us walk out of here, Cross smirked. That's the thing. They won't expect us to go deeper. The elevator came to a halt. The doors creaked open. revealing a dark underground tunnel. John whistled. "Where does this lead?" Cross grabbed a flashlight from the wall. "Out of the Dominion's reach, if we're lucky." The sound of gunfire erupted above them. Elena flinched. "We don't have time. Let's go." They ran. The tunnel twisted and turned beneath Manhattan, leading them deeper into an abandoned subway station. Keanu glanced at the rusted tracks. "How did you know about this place?" Cross smirked. "Because your mother built it." Elena's breath hitched. "She what?" Cross pointed at the old train cars, still sitting on the tracks. "She knew the Dominion would come after her, so she prepared an escape route. This tunnel leads to an old maintenance station outside the city." John inspected the train. "Does it still run?" Cross pulled a lever. The lights inside the car flickered on. "Guess we'll find out." Keanu turned to Elena. "Once we get out, what's the plan?" Elena took a deep breath. "We take this information public. We expose them." Cross's expression darkened. "You don't get it, do you? The Dominion controls everything. Governments, media, corporations. If you go public, you'll just be another conspiracy theorist who disappears." Keanu met his gaze. "Then what do you suggest?" Cross looked at the case of files. "We don't just expose them, we destroy them." The train lurched forward. The station disappeared behind them. The Dominion was coming. And there was no turning back. The train carried them through the underground tunnels, but their destination wasn't just safety. It was war. As they emerged into the outskirts of the city, Nadia was already waiting with a second car. Cross wasted no time. "There's a man named Victor Langston, former Dominion scientist. He's in hiding, but if we can find him, he can help us decode these files." Elena nodded. "Where is he?" Cross handed her a slip of paper. "A cabin in Vermont. He won't trust you, but mention your mother's name." Keanu placed a hand on Elena's shoulder. "We're with you." Elena looked at her mother's journal. The Dominion took everything from her family. Keanu stood frozen, his heart pounding, as the girl's words echoed in his mind. The city lights shimmered around them, but in that moment, everything else faded into the background. "You knew my mother?" Keanu finally asked, his voice laced with emotion. The girl, whose name was Emily, nodded. "Yes, my mother was the woman you helped years ago. She told me stories about you, how you were kind to her when no one else was. She never forgot you, Keanu." Keanu's breath caught in his throat. His mind raced back to the past, to the moments he had spent helping a struggling woman who had been abandoned by the world. He had never expected to hear of her again, let alone meet her daughter. Tears welled in Emily's eyes as she continued. "She passed away last year, but before she did, she told me that if I ever met you, I should tell you that you gave her hope when she had none. You saved her life that night." Keanu felt a lump in his throat. The weight of her words settled over him like a heavy yet strangely comforting blanket. He had always believed in kindness for its own sake, never expecting anything in return. But now, standing here, he realized how far a single act of compassion could ripple across time. "She wanted me to thank you," Emily whispered, smiling through her tears. "And I do too. Because of you, I had my mother for years longer than I might have. She found strength because of what you did." Keanu reached out and gently took Emily's hands in his. "Thank you for telling me this," he said softly. "Your mother was strong, stronger than I ever was. She made the choice to fight, to keep going. And I'm grateful I could be a small part of that." For a moment they stood in silence, two strangers bound by an invisible thread of fate. The noise of the city buzzed around them, but in that moment nothing else mattered. Finally, Keanu exhaled and smiled. "Can I buy you dinner?" "I'd love to hear more about your mother." Emily chuckled, wiping her tears. I'd like that. As they walked into the restaurant together, the door closing behind them, the story came full circle. Not as an ending, but as a new beginning. Because sometimes the kindness we put into the world finds its way back to us in ways we never expect. Disclaimer: this video is a work of fiction and is created for entertainment purposes only. While inspired by real-life figures, the events, dialogues, and characters depicted in this story are purely imaginative and do not reflect actual occurrences. Any resemblance to real persons, living or dead, is purely coincidental. Viewer discretion is advised.